Hello, everyone. We're here today to discuss biodiversity in the Caribbean. Today we have a slideshow called Biodiversity in the Caribbean, Losing Battle. My name is Carly Tomiko. What is biodiversity? Biodiversity is defined as the biological diversity in an environment or ecosystem indicated by the amount of different species of plants and animals. Biodiversity loss is the decline or disappearance of diversity in these environments and ecosystems. There are three levels of biodiversity that are generally discussed. That would be genetic, species, and ecosystem diversity. The topic of the Caribbean that we are discussing would be an example of ecosystem diversity. Here we have some common causes of biodiversity loss. The first one would be habitat destruction. This is mainly caused by overpopulation, global warming, deforestation, and pollution. Basically, when property is bought and forests are cleared out, they're destroying a habitat. This is because when those trees are cleared out to expand that property, all of the animals and plants that lived there are no longer able to live there. Habitat is gone, and they are forced to move somewhere else. The second cause is invasive species. These are species that do not naturally belong in a specific ecosystem or environment. There are different plants or animals that can be invasive species, and having those species in that area does more harm than good to the diversity of that area. Global warming and climate change directly impact environmental factors. These are caused by overuse of cars. The emissions go into the environment. The use of chemicals, hairsprays, perfumes all have an effect on global warming and climate change. The next cause is pollution. The release of toxic chemicals and items directly harms plants and animals in the ecosystem. A piece of plastic that might not make it into the garbage can when someone tries to toss it in, or the food bags that get thrown out of car windows. These are examples of pollution that individuals may put out on a daily basis that they don't realize has such a drastic effect on biodiversity. Some larger forms of pollution could be untreated sewage or spills from shipping. And the last major cause are natural disasters. Unfortunately, these can't be avoided. Floods, droughts, forest fires, earthquakes all have major impacts on biodiversity. When a hurricane comes in and floods out an entire area, all the animals that lived in that area that are unable to breathe underwater are forced to move, or they unfortunately die off, causing a loss in biodiversity in the area. All of these were briefly discussed on the last slide, but these specifically deal with biodiversity loss in the Caribbean. Habitat destruction and fragmentation are a major threat to the diversity of organisms in the Caribbean. Natural factors play a huge role in the decrease of diversity in the area. Hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods are a major threat to wildlife in the Caribbean. Pollution is a major threat here as well. Specifically, sewage, garbage, and shipping pollution are very common. There are more than 700 of Caribbean species that are threatened, plants and animals. The Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund has assessed the Caribbean as one of the major hotspots for biodiversity loss on the planet. The World Database for Protected Areas lists approximately 749 areas in the Caribbean that are protected. More than half of these are marine, and unfortunately, in islands and marine areas, protections and management are weaker. On this slide, I want to discuss what you can do as individuals, not as a company, but we can reduce consumption of products that harm the environment and replace them with eco-friendly options, waste less food, eliminate litter habits and reduce pollution, recycle. Educate others, friends, family, coworkers, anybody about biodiversity and biodiversity loss. Try to repair items instead of replacing them as often as possible to eliminate waste. And support projects, companies, charities, and organizations that work to promote biodiversity. Now, you as companies, as people that I have wanted to discuss the issue with, ways you can help eliminate biodiversity loss will be to make more conscious decisions at a company level to help eliminate causes of biodiversity loss. This is my ecological framework model that I made based on biodiversity in the Caribbean. We have anthropogenic factors, runoff pollution, riding and biking, development of coastal settlements, water pollution, sewage, destruction of habitats, tourism, and overfishing. Then we have the environmental and ecological factors such as tropical storms, climate change, invasive species, vegetation and soil damage, and coral reef degradation. Although it's a little messy with all the lines going from one side to the other, we can see just how big of an impact each thing has on each other. And then on the environmental ecological side, you have tropical storms and climate change that are tied together, and you have climate change and coral reef degradation that are tied together. Overfishing causes climate change and invasive species, tourism, climate change and vegetation soil damage, untreated sewage leads to vegetation and soil damage, coral reef degradation. Water pollution affects vegetation and soil damage and coral reef degradation. Development of coastal settlements and ports has a direct impact on climate change and vegetation and soil damage. Off-roading and biking has a direct effect on vegetation and soil damage, and runoff pollution affects climate change and coral reef degradation. Back in 2012, 2 regional projects were implemented on the Caribbean which aimed to increase ecosystem-based management. Their objectives included strengthening sub-regional collab work for EBM principles, getting the tools needed for increasing marine diversity, advanced protected marine areas data compilation to better provide management and conservation, develop better responses to ecosystem threats such as climate change, and increase education to get public support. Just a little bit on my thoughts about that. I do not believe the practices implemented have helped yet. I believe it will take some time to fully have an impact on the biodiversity levels in the area, but every step that anyone can make towards improving biodiversity is a positive for the environment. Every choice we make has an impact on biodiversity, big or small. The implementing of the practices tie into the framework model because they all have a direct impact on the factors of biodiversity. For example, implementing better responses to climate change connects to climate change and global warming in the model. By responding appropriately, these 2 factors may decrease over time. If we were to decrease global warming or climate change, that would have a direct impact on coral reef degradation, which may potentially slow down. Another example is by increasing education for the general public, anthropogenic factors of pollution, off-road biking, riding, and tourism may be directly impacted and hopefully decreased as well, which would then lessen the vegetation and soil damage that is caused by those factors. My idea for some swag is to create a video game based around the concept of biodiversity. I played a game once that was called Island Saver, and it was about cleaning up an island and saving animal species from litter. The message that the game puts out there is to eliminate litter and to clean up when you can. Another game I've played is called One Leaves, and it's a race simulator in which you have to get to the end before another person, and this represents the 1 in 2 chances of dying from smoking. Both of these games have very powerful messages that they're able to put out there, and a large age variety play video games. Video games are huge nowadays. You got little kids that play games on their parents' phones. You have teenagers that have Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, and you have adults that like to play games with their children. I believe this form of swag is relevant because the game can teach people about the issue of biodiversity loss, while money being spent on the game and in-game purchases can be used to benefit the movement to decrease biodiversity loss. Thank you so much. That is all I have for you today.